So in today's lesson, we are going to be discussing the verb ir, which means to go. The verb ir is often used to tell where someone goes and even what someone is going to do. And oftentimes it requires the preposition a in Spanish, which means to. Before we jump into the specifics on the verb ir, I wanted to show you a chart that contains different types of verbs in Spanish and how they function. As you all know, we would typically start with infinitives, which are verbs that end in ar, er, or ir. Then, from the infinitives, they can be separated into regular verbs, irregular verbs, and even stem changers. We'll talk more about stem changers as we continue on in the course. So as you can see, under the regular verbs, I have the verb hablar, comer, and escribir. We have an AR verb, an ER verb, and an IR verb. At this point, we know how to conjugate all of these types of verbs since they're regular, meaning that they have consistent verb endings. Over on the irregular side, we have the verb ser, which means to be, which we have discussed in this course. We also have the verb tener, and we have the verb hacer. The verb ser is a completely irregular verb because every conjugation is different and does not follow much of a pattern. The verb tener would be considered an irregular stem changer, meaning that it changes somewhat within the stem, and we'll get to that later on, but also it's irregular in the yo spot because it says tango. The verb hacer is an ER verb and is conjugated normally, just like the verb comer, except in the yo spot it says hago, H-A-G-O. So the question remains, where does the verb ir fit in among these different verb categories? It fits in under the irregular verb because the verb conjugations do not match hardly at all. If you think about it, the steps to conjugating a verb is to drop off either the AR, the ER, or the IR ending. If you did this with the verb ir, you would have nothing to go off of. So let's look at how to actually conjugate the verb ir. Like I said previously, the normal steps to conjugating verbs in Spanish is to drop off the IR ending. If we did that, we would have nothing to go off of. And that's what leads us to understand the fact that the verb ir, which means to go, is an irregular verb in Spanish. So, in order to conjugate the verb ir, in the yo spot, you would actually say voy. In the to, you would say vas. El, ella, usted would be va. Nosotros would be vamos. And then the ellos, ellas, ustedes box would be van. As you can see, this verb actually sort of functions like the verb ser, because if you conjugate the verb ser in the yo spot, it would be soy. But then it has almost AR verb endings. It's weird. Or irregular. As mentioned previously, the verb ir typically goes along with the preposition a in Spanish, which means to. So in order to do this, let's look at how the word a works along with the definite article the, el or la. In Spanish, if you were to say a el, you would actually combine those to make the word al, which would mean to and the. Keep this in mind. If you combined a and la, it would simply be a la, two separate words, because the vowel sounds do not blend together. In the previous example, a el, if you were to say it quickly, al, it blends together and forms this new preposition. Here's an example in Spanish. Los lunes yo voy, that's the verb ir conjugated. Instead of saying a el, you would say al and then gimnasio. That means on Mondays, I go, or even I'm going, to the gym. The other example, los martes vamos, it's the conjugation of the verb ir in the nosotros form, a la escuela. Notice that you do not have to combine this because the a is separated by the consonant sound la with the l, so they do not combine to make a new preposition. This sentence means, on Tuesdays, we go, or we are going, to school. This same concept can also be applied to the word de. De in Spanish means of or from. When you use the preposition de with the definite article el, they combine together to make the word del, which is a new preposition, meaning of thee or from thee. If you were to use the preposition de with la, you do not have to combine the two words to make a new preposition because the word de is separated by the consonant sound made within the word la, and so therefore is separated. Just keep this in mind as you go throughout this Spanish course. So here we have some examples where we will conjugate the verb ir for the different subject pronouns in order to create sentences. So let's look at the first example. Yo blank a mi clase. How would you conjugate the verb ir in order to function correctly in this sentence? The correct answer would be voy, meaning I go to my class or I am going to my class. For the next example, how would you conjugate the verb ir for to? In order for this sentence to work, you would conjugate it by saying vas. Tu vas a la biblioteca. You are going or you go to the library. How would you conjugate the verb ir for Mario? The correct way to conjugate the verb ir would be va. Mario no va al restaurante hoy. Mario does not go or is not going, pay attention to this, a plus el equals al, to the restaurant today. How would you conjugate the verb ir for ellos? The correct conjugation would be van. Ellos van a mi casa. They go or they are going to my house. How would you conjugate the verb ir for nosotros? The correct conjugation would be vamos. Nosotros vamos a la fiesta esta noche, meaning we go or we are going to the party this evening or tonight. Here is something very interesting when you begin to delve into the verb ir in relation to Spanish. In Spanish, there are different grammar formulas or grammar patterns that can be used. And if you are wanting to communicate the idea that someone is going to do something, you are creating what is called the immediate future. And so what you would do is you would conjugate the verb ir, then you would place directly after it as a separate word the word a, and then you would just leave the next verb as the infinitive form without conjugating it in order to say that someone is going to do something. So for instance, this first example, tu blank el agua. We are trying to communicate this. You are going to drink the water. So my first question is this. How would you conjugate the verb ir for to? The correct conjugation would be vas. Then directly after that, you would add the word a. Then you would write the infinitive unconjugated to say beber, which would create the sentence that says, you are going to drink the water. Although this word a right here technically doesn't have much meaning because vas means are going and then beber means to drink, you still need to include it so that it functions within the grammar formula communicating the immediate future. Let's look at the next example. We have ella and then el cereal, showing that we are trying to communicate that she is going to eat the cereal. So how would you conjugate the verb ir for ella? The answer would be va. Then, according to the formula, you would have to add the word a there in order for it to correctly work with the formula. And then you would have to add the verb comer unconjugated in the infinitive form. So let's go ahead and try to communicate these three sentences using the immediate future and the grammar formula ir plus a plus infinitive in order to communicate what someone is going to do, or that someone is going to do something. For the first example, nosotros, and then la ropa, we would have to basically communicate the idea that we are going to buy the clothing. I'm going to go ahead and give you a hint that the word to buy, in case you are not aware, is the word comprar. So how would you create this sentence in order to show that we are going to buy the clothing? You would first have to conjugate the verb ir, which would be vamos. Then you would have to use the word a, and then plug in the infinitive form, comprar. Nosotros vamos a comprar la ropa. We are going to buy the clothing. So for the second example, we are trying to communicate the idea that I am going to watch the television. Hopefully by now you know that the word to watch is mirar. So how would you conjugate the verb ir along with the formula to communicate this message? For starters, you would conjugate the verb ir to say voy. Then you would have to plug in the word a. And then you would just simply place the infinitive after it. Voy a mirar la televisión. For the last sentence, ustedes en el parque, what we are trying to communicate is that someone, y'all, are going to run in the park. The verb to run is correr. So how would you use this grammar formula in order to communicate the immediate future? You would conjugate the verb ir for ustedes, which would be van. Then once again, you would place the preposition a after it. And lastly, include the infinitive right after. Ustedes van a correr en el parque. So just as an overview, the verb ir is an irregular verb. It can be conjugated to show that someone is going somewhere or is going to do something using the grammar formula ir+a+infinitive.